call, sorry. I'm going to call the budget work to order. Ms. Bowie, will you call the roll?
Here's the roll call. Melissa Mason,
Here.
Josie Barnhart, Pat Bradford,
I am here.
Judy Justice, Dr. Tim Merrick,
Here.
David Perry, Peter Wildebohr.
Present.
All right. I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda. So moved.
Second.
Y'all could do it all in unison. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes 4-0. And I have asked Mr. Wildebohr to lead us in the pledge today.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Next on the agenda, the School Budget and Fiscal Control Act overview. Starting with the Fiscal Control Act overview and Mr. Aaron Buller.
Good afternoon. I apologize for being maybe behind a few of you. Hopefully not. You're fine to look forward. I know it's kind of awkward to turn around, but I'll be speaking from the sides in front of me. But pleasure to be here with you again today. Some of you may recall we were here in, I believe, December, did some introductory stuff to you. We've been working with your district on an engagement to kind of look at a number of things. So, but we were asked today to come in and provide an overview over some of the budget practices. But before we get started, I will have to say, and I'm a very honest, transparent person, but I attended probably over 1,000 board sessions in my career, and this is the first Friday afternoon session I've ever attended. So you all need to be commended for that. So that is a yeoman's job to come in on a Friday afternoon. I know some Saturdays and that are taken, but again, just want to share some insight with you all today, answer any questions you may have, and provide some overview. Again, some of you are aware, some of you are new. School operations specialist is made up of a number of people that have prior governmental experience, public school experience. We cover a broad range of the different operational areas. We don't deal with the instructional aspect of the school district, but we help school districts make themselves or evaluate their efficiency across the board. We provide a lot of training, mentoring across the state. And again, it was very good to be involved in this district. Again, I'm not going to read you our story and all that. What we're going to cover today is just some of the things are very specific to statutes, but some of these, and I apologize if any of you have heard some of this before, but we don't try to recreate the wheel. There's great tools out there across the board. GFOA is the Governing Financial Officer Association for all government entities. They've created great tools. They've worked with finance officers all over the country on recommendations of what should be in a very eventful, smart budgeting process. So those are labor intensive, they're resource intensive, but they're things you need at least have in your mind of what you may be needing to consider as you walk through and you navigate through your budget process. We'll talk about this a little bit more in general, but school business is big business, and it's a very complex puzzle to put together. People think because it's somewhat spend it or lose it type revenue, it really is complicated when you look at all the different aspects. So again, we're recommending a number of things that are in that outline just for you to know that they are available. They've already created some great tools, but we first and foremost acknowledge those are difficult on staff to once they get implemented, it's a whole different thing than starting it up from scratch. Y'all really testing my eyesight from back here. Let's see. Again, North Carolina is going through a number of challenges, and you all know them. You ran for the board. You're familiar with a lot of these. But we get to do what a lot of staff doesn't get to do, and I was in the same seat when I was everything from a CFO to a COO to served as interim superintendent myself, but you're always running in many different directions. Sometimes you don't get to analyze as much data across the state as you do when you're in other positions. So it's one of the liberties we get by working in numerous districts is we get to look at a lot of things, but it's really mind-blowing that ADM across North Carolina is taking a significant decline. Even some of your larger, more urban areas, I mean, I hate to always use them as an example, but Wake County in the early 2000s to the mid-2000s, they grew by probably 60, 70,000 students. In the last 10 years, even Wake County has only grown by 3,000 students. I can tell you from having sitting in the seat, and you're very blessed to have very, very highly skilled financial staff, it's very difficult to manage through reductions in ADM because they don't come in neat packages. They don't come with the ability for really any per pupil amount to really be slashed in any direct way. State funding in North Carolina, there's no other way to say it, but it's one of very few in the entire country that operate off the model that they operate. They give you money to fund positions, they give you money to fund certain categorical allotments, they give you program dollars. It's really not a weighted student formula. I've done some training the last couple of weekends for some North Carolina and South Carolina groups, and even South Carolina has moved forward with a more weighted student formula method. So again, some of those intricacies of North Carolina make it a little more challenging, a little difficult. The budget timeline in North Carolina, again, and I'm don't trying to sound like beating a dead horse, but the budget timeline is awful. You have to present, we'll go over this in a minute, what's in statute, when it's required of the board, when the superintendent has to submit their stuff. But you submit your stuff to the commissioners by May 15th. They normally don't approve it till mid to late June. You're waiting on a state budget. You have to operate a school year. Your schools have to hire people. They have to replace positions. They need to know what resources they're dealing with as well as you as across the district. So the budget timeline in general in North Carolina is a very difficult timeline. And then you add in the complications of the last couple of years, then they go without even approving a budget. They approve small budgets. They take little steps, but it's, again, not the clarity you need to really run an organization this size or issue $10 billion of school funding across the state. You're very funding dependent. You don't get to raise taxes. Some states do. Some states have taxing authority for school districts. North Carolina doesn't. So you're always in the position of relying on someone else, so you're very funding dependent. You're an urban system. Urban and rural have differences. They're always trying to make up some of the discrepancies in those areas. You have wealthy versus poor. You have challenges like everyone else. Right now, staff turnover is hard, and finding people to replace that turnover is hard. We've been dealing with the charter schools, and they lifted the cap on that in 2014-15. That changed the entire landscape of ADM across North Carolina, but now we have the voucher issue. So again, you're always facing something new in the equation. What we're going to start out by talking about a little bit, just so you know, and again, if you ever want to help get yourself to sleep any night, pull out the Fiscal Control Act, pick it up as a reading document, and it'll probably put you out in 5 minutes. But it's very prescriptive on saying how Ashley should do her job, how Dr. Barnes, what our time frames are in there. It spells out what you have to use for a chart of accounts, when you have to submit your budget. From a budgeting standpoint, Dr. Barnes is required to have to you his proposed budget by May 1st. With that budget, it has to obtain a superintendent's message. There's a number of things in statute that are said to be part of that budget message. That's a little bit vague across the state because student achievement, a number of things are written into that statute. A lot of districts don't overwhelm the budget process by including that in the budget message. They do different reports on different things throughout the year so that the budget message may speak to the current climate, to some of the revenue issues, so on and so forth, but there are other requirements in there. After it's approved, after it's submitted to you, you have to adopt it by May 15th. Doesn't mean he can't submit it to you before May 1st, but you have to adopt it by May 15th and submit it to the county commissioners by May 15th. It becomes your budget once you've approved the budget. Up until that time, it's the proposed superintendent's budget. So as a board, you're in that process. Again, you'll see different districts do it different ways, but then at such time that you've gotten what I believe to be the majority of your resources approved, state, local, federal, then a budget resolution should be submitted to you for approval. That is a balanced budget. The superintendent's budget at that time is what he's asking for and what you adopt, but it's not truly a balanced budget until you reconcile all your revenue and expenditures from all your sources. So you'll be presented, some people do it in the summer, some people wait until they get a state budget, it might be an early fall activity, there's different timings on that, but you start the next year's budget process with a budget resolution being approved by the board. Yes?
Just a question of clarity. The budget I bring, because this is my first one too, the budget I bring to the board as a balanced budget, it can be balanced because of the asks we're making to the county commissioners, correct?
Correct.
So I can say, it'll balance if you fund these things. Okay.
Right, and, well, yes, with the unknown that you don't know what's going on with your state budget, your federal
Sure,
budget.
sure.
You're bringing a balanced budget with everything you know at that time. The budget resolution reconciles it to the
And
next
that's what we do
stage
in the
once
fall.
everything's
Yeah,
basically approved, if it's approved, and like this year, there is no state budget for the entire state on that process. And then throughout the year, the board will be brought budget amendments. And the budget amendments are what has changed from the time you approved the budget resolution to what's going on with the amendments. Ashley can probably confirm some of these. The state puts out initial budget figures as soon as they have what they deem to be, knowledge of the state budget. On average, the state sends out somewhere between 75 and 85 revisions a year to the budget. So you're constantly receiving adjustments for charter schools, for virtual public schools, for Indian gaming money, for this, for that. So constantly Ashley's having to adjust the budget, but you're getting federal money at different times. They're dropping federal allocations, so on and so forth. But you as a board will be responsible for approving budget amendments within that process. Some districts spend a lot of time on budget amendments. My professional opinion is it's more of a quarterly activity because nothing really changes that's that drastic that you have to bring it every board meeting, but those are decisions of the board and of staff. But once you do a reconciled budget, it may be early fall, you bring something in December, you bring something in March, you bring something year end, and then you may have a post year end to really clean up for what they call the 13th period in order to adjust. One thing in line with that, it's not really in a slide that I wanted to go over, is kind of what's the expectation financially, budget-wise, of the school board, the superintendent, and the CFO. School board really is set here to establish priorities for the financial management of the district. The school board provides the superintendent with the board priorities in the development of the budget. And we'll go through some of this in a minute that, again, are some tools to help you through that process. But you all know it. You live in the community, you've got interest in being on the school board. There's many things tugging at your heart to be priorities of the school system budget. So again, but you have to help the superintendent in setting your board priorities. I know you all have conducted some great activities already. You got some follow-up today. Some of those things are exactly what you need to be doing in order to get collaboration and input on your budget. The board is responsible for establishing the policies that direct the financial management of the district. That's very important to know. It's your responsibility to set the policies. So if you have dollar threshold limits, if you are requiring something different, then it needs to be in your policy that, again, the staff is following as far as their directive and the superintendent on establishing good financial practices. The school board should review the budget on a periodic basis and make approval to the adjustments as needed. The school board should review and approve, this is important, review and approve contracts at the board threshold, and the school board should review but does not have to approve contracts at the threshold of the superintendent's approval. Those are the normal practices across the state. You have in policy what needs to be brought to you over a certain amount, you are required to approve. There should be nothing that goes on in the district that you haven't approved that's at that threshold. But the superintendent's threshold, normally the practice is it's just brought to you for review of what he has approval for. Other school board responsibilities in relation to budget, the school board approves the decision to ask the voters to pass a referendum. That would be the board's responsibility. If you want to move forward with a referendum, then you have to give approval for that. The school board approves the decision to ask the voters for a bond or a referendum for facility needs. And again, the school board prioritizes construction and building renovation needs of the district. They work with staff, again, similar to the contract approval. You make those recommendations. Those go into possibly bond funding, one-time use of revenue, so on and so forth. But those are really the structure. Now, you may say there's other things, but those are really the structures around the board's responsibility within fiscal management. The superintendent's responsibility is to prepare a detailed budget based on the board's priorities, parameters along with a budget message outlining those statutory requirements. So again, then the superintendent takes your priorities, what he's gotten from the community, and he presents a budget. The superintendent should present a balanced budget resolution to the board for consideration and approval. The superintendent presents amendments to the board for consideration and approval. The superintendent administers the budget, assuring the expenditures of the district funds are within legal requirements of the budget. Now again, some of that may be delegated to the CFO, but that's part of the superintendent's responsibility in the overall oversight of the district and the budget. The superintendent acts as a resource to the board within the framework of the district's audit. You'll have an independent audit that's done. Normally, it's presented in the November-December timeframe. Ashley can probably confirm a number of things I say, but you normally want your budget presented to you before the new calendar year. You need to know, are there any issues? What's your fund balance situation before you really get into the spring, which is your heavy budget time. So an audit presented prior to the holidays, prior to the first of the next calendar year is usually, and again, by local government commission, it has to be submitted to them by November 15th. They can get extensions, but normally if it's getting extensions, that means there's some reason why the audit's not being completed. The superintendent makes recommendations to the board about the needs for the amount of a referendum. So again, you help set the priorities, but the superintendent makes recommendations along with staff along those needs. I'm not going to read to you a list of CFO responsibilities, but it's really to keep up good financial management across all areas of financial activities, payroll, accounts payable, contract and administration, fixed assets. I mean, you could just go on and on and on, and Ashley's blessed with a very good staff, but again, it takes the supervision of the CFO to be responsible for those tasks, and those things are reviewed within your audit process, so on and so forth. So those things really tie in relation to what's spelled out statutorily of how your budget should look. Again, I get to say what I believe is hopefully relevant and important to you. You have to be careful as a board. I've been there, done a lot of requests. There's reasons that they use a chart of accounts. The chart of account explains to you how the resources are being allocated. Actually, knowledge of the chart allows you to interpret a lot more information than you think. Making individual requests oftentimes pull people away that they're in somewhat the weeds of pulling information that may not be as material to the district as relevant. Again, you have liberty to ask anything you want to ask, but a lot of times if you focus on the main things, and we're going to go through some of those in smart budgeting, You just remember, if you hear nothing else from me today, 85% of every dollar you spend in a school system budget goes to salary and benefits. So your focus should be on how many positions do you have, how many are you allocating, are they funded within your budget, do you have adequate resources to cover those positions? Those are the things that become very challenging for school districts, and we're going to go through some of those additional challenges, so on and so forth. Again, I spoke to this. North Carolina is very unique, but position, categorical, program allotments, you get state, local, federal, capital outlay, child nutrition, and special revenue funds. Then you have the school funds at the individual school. Those are really managed by the finance department, but under a specific direction of the school principal. So there's a lot of resources crossing a lot of different facilities in a lot of different aspects of your district, just like any school district. I often said when I managed finance, nowhere else do you normally have a 5-year-old walking up to a 21-year-old handing them cash, and you have to reconcile that process all the way through in order to have good, sound financial management. There's just a number of things that have to be looked at. You have ball games, you have ticket sales, so on and so forth. But again, and one thing you may hear, and again, you'll be educated by staff on a number of things, charter payments are becoming a bigger and bigger issue across the state as the charter school enrollment's growing and the public school ADMs either staying flat or declining. But you have a special revenue fund because the revenues that aren't legally required to be paid to charter schools go into your special revenue account. Your indirect costs, your interest income, your Medicaid funds, your ROTC reimbursement. So you may think, why do we have 2 local funds? The reason you do that is anything that goes into your general, local, current expense budget, revenue-wise, is subject to payment to the charter schools. So as you approve a budget, and again, we won't go into, every district has a different percentage. When I was in Durham, I'll share my specifics, we had 28% of our population went to charter schools. So when we asked for $1, we had to ask for $1.28 in order to accomplish what we needed. Because the minute we received $1, 28% of that went to the charter schools. So those things will be presented to you in different forms or fashions so you can understand those as you move through. Again, I'm not going to read all these to you. You know that the budget process, in order to be really transparent, it's difficult. It's driven by the spending. It's really proactive versus reactive. There's been a lot of hard times recently, and then when you add the ESSER spending into the equation, we've really not had a realistic picture of what school spending across the nation has been on education. I may have this wrong, but I think North Carolina received over $6.5 billion for ESSER funding across the state. That was just for North Carolina. So again, a lot of very crucial needs were met, but a lot of spending habits were very unique during that process. Yes, sir.
Just to give you some numbers to put on it, last year the state increased our funding by several $1 million. The local government added several $1 million to our funding. We still lost as a district $13 million last year. After all the dust settled, I know that we started with the 20 million, the state leaned in a little bit, the county leaned in a little bit, but the loss we got from the ESSER funding in the government was so severe that we still came in $13 million less. And when you said earlier 85% of your operating budget is salaries and benefits, that meant that 85% of that 13 million was people. Thank you, sorry.
No problem. Again, what you're going to learn through this, and as you become, and I know some of you knew, some of you experienced on the board, a lot of your priorities are set for you. The state of North Carolina is doing a great thing across the state, is trying to bring livable wages in all areas up to a figure that, again, keeps moving. We jumped a couple of years ago to $15 an hour, but in a lot of school districts, there were people making $9, $10, $11 an hour. So a jump to 15 was a significant increase. When you add retirement on top of that at 25%, you got Social Security, which doesn't change, but hospitalization for an employee at over $8,000 per employee, the cost of a $22,000 employee is something like $17,000, $18,000 to provide the benefits. you can, that ramps up as you get higher into the cost. So again, a $15 wage an hour for your child nutrition department, for your after-school programs, keeping up in the community with everyone else you're competing against, salary and benefits are going up. So again, you're having to forecast what is it going to cost over time. And again, I don't have to say anything, and I'm not talking about just the grocery store. You have a gentleman that does an excellent job over your operations, but I guarantee you, he can tell you nothing has gone down in price. Nothing has declined. I mean, cost of tires, cost of oil, cost of insulation, everything they need, lumber. You add a hurricane and a fire into that situation, it just changes it even more. So again, you're always battling some difficult challenges for an entity this large that being funding dependent, you have to have some flexibility to adjust and maneuver within that. So I just always remind everyone, don't ever spend a dollar you've got until you really know your final situation, because things can change across the board and a number of things can go up and a number of things can go down. You all got it. I live close to the coast. You got an unprecedented number. You got snow, which is unusual, but you had cold weather. A month of cold weather to a school district can change a utility bill cost by 5, 10, 15% that you're not normally paying in something this large. Again, there's fluctuation just up front.
Just want to add that as people talk about salaries, what we try to help our employees understand is there's a difference between what you're paid and what the district invests in you as an employee. And we have something on our website where you can actually look at your total compensation. But I think pension is something that is going away in a lot of places, but is really significant lifelong benefit for educators as well, because the cost to the educator of what they put in their pension has not changed. But even in the last 5 years, we put 25.04% of your yearly salary, the district invests in your pension, which is millions upon millions upon millions of dollars. 25% is, I think, a pretty high number. But as people continue to age out and people are living longer, they have to increase the cost of that pension to keep everybody fluid. Oh, you're welcome. He's the one draining it.
Well,
Yeah,
it's not that great.
I'm right.
Sorry about that, but the reality is it ain't that great.
And along those same lines, and again, sometimes you get, Ashley, myself, get labeled to be the, down, always sharing kind of poor information, but we're having to share real information. But we've already been privy to information that, the state health plan that funds number of state employees across the state is losing hundreds of millions of dollars. And I've been in it 30-plus years, and the employer has never had to pay into their hospitalization. They're talking about that may have to be something down the road, where not only do you pay for spouse coverage, family coverage, but you may have to start paying some amount in for the individual coverage. And again, those things, just because, you don't control them. But think of how many employees you've got. Most districts right now are projecting from right around an $8,100 per person employer cost for hospitalization, budgeting about $8,500. If something else hits that, that's a probably $400 or $500 increase for every employee you have across this district that's a full-time equivalent or 75% or above. So again, all that says is in any budget process, you're going to want to set priorities. You're going to get a lot of things pulled at you that are weighing heavy on you as a board member for your part of the community. But you just have to know there's a lot of what we call fixed costs that really drive the overall budget. Again, you got charter school, you got vouchers, and then again, we've talked about the yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You had mentioned before a figure, percentage of the charter schools. Can we know what ours
Yes,
is about?
please.
8%?
8?
Yeah, 8%. We really don't have as many charter school students as what he was,
Like in Wake County.
2,100, I believe, currently.
Thank you. Thank you.
And unfortunately, that number is usually growing most places, but just something as you review ADM, review your numbers, didn't have to do that 10, 15 years ago, but you got to review the charter numbers simultaneously to your numbers to, okay, what are we projecting that up? I mean, again, when the cap was lifted in 2014-15, it went from 100 across the state to now there's over 200. You can get a charter approved, and next thing you know, you can have one opening up for 600, 700, 800 kids. In the Triangle area, there's some that open up almost overnight within a 6-month period. Again, I usually like to give specifics, but one opened up immediately in the Apex area with 2,000 students. They had 6,000 kids on a wait list. So that's bigger than probably 40% of the school districts across the state as far as overall EDM. So, and again, what we're going to start to cover now, just some things for you to keep in your mind. We're not going to go into a lot of detail about this, but again, you have to spend your time wisely. Really concentrate on what's of value to the district that you can be helping the district evaluate, review. But again, I first and foremost say it, you don't do staff's jobs for them. Staff is paid to do their job. Staff is paid to manage the budget. Staff is paid to bring you a balanced budget. I don't want to privy anything. We've been looking at things in the district, but you all have an outstanding process for tracking who you have and where it's paid. That doesn't exist in a lot of places. It sounds trivial, but that is a huge component to success. So again, don't want to get ahead of anything. You got to have good policies. Those policies will dictate a lot of the good work that goes on. You have expectations as a superintendent. You have expectations of the district financially. You're going to want to say, what does it take for us to be financially prudent? There's a strong push across the state where county commissioners want school boards to be totally dependent upon county commissioners. They don't want them having their own fund balance. That's not a healthy situation, in my opinion. So again, you as a board, certain boards set policy around what is the threshold, what do they want to see in a fund balance. Doesn't mean you can always obtain it, but if you don't have a goal, then it becomes even more challenging across the board. Review relevant and meaningful data. Budget detail can be valuable, but it can also be summarized. You know how many of what you're paying, how many custodians, how much your utility bills are. You want to focus on the big things. You know, I used to get a lot of requests that always wanted to pull down to travel or workshops, and those are important expenditures, but they make up probably about 0.002% of a district's budget. So yes, you have to monitor those, you have to have practices in place, but you have to be looking at the important stuff. And again, don't want to privy anything, but you've got excellent budget documents being provided to you, being put on your website. It's a matter of understanding those documents, understanding the relationship, and then ultimately what are they meaning across the district for providing resources. I've already said this, it's a very menial kind of training, but oftentimes you do a training on the chart of accounts. So you see, what does the number one mean? What does the number, it means state funds. Number two means local funds, because you'll pull up documents and in your world, we live it every day, but you're going to get something presented to you and you think, oh, what does that mean? How do I differentiate that? How do I know what I'm spending on teachers? How do I know what I'm spending on custodial, clerical? There's a way to summarize it if you understand what the numerical coding within that chart means. Ashley and them are actually way above a lot of the states. They're implementing new and additional digits within that. They've already implemented those. So they've already gone a step ahead of most districts in being where the district is pushing, where the state is pushing those requirements. Spend time on the big things, personnel, contracts, who you do business with, and what your historical trends are. School budgeting is not rocket science. It's a lot of pieces coming together for a lot of things. But if you see trends, what have we spent for the last 3 years? What have we spent? Most times you can't go 5 years back. What makes your job right now a little more difficult is what you're looking at is really not relevant unless you pull out the federal ESSER dollars. Yeah. Because it's distorted so much of that puzzle right now. But in a normal time period, you can look at something and say, hey, if it's gone up 10% each of the last 5 years, then it's probably going to go up another 10%. If it's gone up 15%, or if it's stayed flat, those are the type of things you need to look at. And again, you're doing it by approving your threshold contract amounts, but you know, who do you do business with? Who have you committed to? A lot of those commitments are not singular in years. They're multi-year contracts for academic purposes, for financial purposes, so on and so forth. So those 4 buckets alone can allow you to see and handle a huge part of the aspect. Again, you all have a lot of great things going on previously, and you're working toward enhancement of those. I'm not going to go through these, but you know, again, any good process just has to have the right steps. You have a strategic plan. That strategic plan, again, is a roadmap for your district. It drives the priorities. It sets those goals and benchmarks within each priority. They usually come at a cost. So oftentimes, while you're reviewing your strategic plan, you're using your budget at the same time to say, can we advance that? You have the normal steps within your strategic plan, but there, as you all know, there's a lot more detail to the strategic plan that outlines what you're trying to do. I've talked about this. Don't lose sight of the complexity of the puzzle. We work in over a dozen districts almost simultaneously. They rotate a lot. I've never in my career seen the challenges that finance officers are facing right now. Managing all the different aspects, managing the decline in ADM, managing the uncertainty around revenue. You know, I don't want to put anyone into a fear factor, but a week and a half ago, every finance officer in the state got a letter saying, hey, federal funds are frozen. It was 2 days before payroll. So, I mean, again, things like that you have to adjust to on the fly. You have to have money to make sure. That ended up becoming somewhat of a lot of nothing about something at the point, but as a person getting ready to click send on payroll, you wanted to be able to afford all your employees across the state. You know these things. I'm not going to go over them with you, but if you just summarize this in a picture form, you know, safety and security, your buildings, your athletics, of course your academics is the purpose of what you're here for, your transportation. When you start setting priorities and you have limited new money to really allocate based upon other priorities or fixed costs that are driving the budget, you just have to be smart. You have to realize how and what are we doing. You know, I've sat in the seat of being over operations for the district. Districts across the country, for a good reason, have spent billions upon billions in safety and security. Do they make our schools any more safe? We don't know. But again, do you not do it? Do you do it? Do you invest in changing entranceways, putting cameras in, changing, you know, access points? All those things come at a cost that you've got to prioritize in helping the superintendent set those district priorities, knowing that you have limited resources to tap. One of the things you can't lose sight of, and again, we're working with the staff, but operational efficiency means more money you can put in the classroom. So you're always trying to not streamline it where you're making the services not of value to the district, but are you really running those efficiently? Because again, part of the reason we have a lot of business is because a lot of districts struggle with this. They're turning over key staff that learning how to run a child nutrition program is not something you learn overnight. Learning how to run a district transportation program, learning how to run maintenance, managing the dollars and the revenue associated with your exceptional children's program. All of those things are key components that if you're not doing well, then all of a sudden you're spending resources that you really need in order to prioritize the academic achievement of this district. And again, I say that as a business person. I'm not prioritizing academics as our number one goal and the number one function of every school system. But the ability to know that your district does these things well is a huge aspect to how the district is doing. Again, not going to go through, but we're going to hit on some things quickly. Know that whether it's your school administrators, your district administrators, and superintendents especially, they're putting out fires by the hour. They're putting them out by the minute. They normally can't sit through a meeting without 3 or 4 things raising to the top of their email that's really priority across the district. So again, you always just have to be sensitive to what is the timing. You know, reviewed again a lot of documents here, but you all have a very good budget calendar. It outlines the activities. This is not just a 1-2 month activity. It starts in the fall, it goes through the year, you review it through the summer, you come back and evaluate. All those are key components. But again, finding time for all groups to be involved that need to be involved, you know, school level personnel, community personnel. I mean, I'll give you credit, you're doing a great thing. You've started a budget advisory committee. It's difficult to educate the public on your budget because everyone sees it as the biggest drain or the biggest expense in every community. But by having other constituents understanding, argue on your behalf, you're taking a very, very crucial step in something that's very beneficial to the process. You know, I'm just going to say it, and you can take it for what it's worth on the whole thing. Every school district, their central office is called the Ivory Palace. You know, it's called the place where everyone goes to make the big dollars that doesn't want to be in the schools. That's not the case. You have to evaluate the organizational structure of the central office. What's the services that are being provided? And sometimes we think, and this is part of what you'll learn in some of these tools as you use them in the future, you think, okay, we're going to cut 20% of our central office. Those people may be a pre-K director that's, you know, generating funds for that program, and I'm not picking on pre-K, but you start slashing assistant director positions in departments, they're responsible for helping run the efficiency of that. So as a board, you don't make the decisions on staff, you only help hire a superintendent, but you're asking the superintendent, and again, you all are very transparent, you print your organizational charts, you list the people, you're taking all those steps to say that hopefully you've evaluated what they're doing for the district. And again, size, value, and responsibilities are all key. I've been there, done it. You can have a lot of central office people that may not be worth what you're paying them, but there's a lot that are probably worth 3 people's salaries. So you always have to evaluate. Yes, Dr.
And in regards to balancing that support we give to schools, our central office is 52 people smaller than it was last year. We cut 15% of our central office because we didn't want all those ESSER dollars to get communicated directly to schools.
That's the next bullet. You know, for everything that's
Sorry.
being cut, no, you're great. No, you got to put reality to these things. I mean, I'm just sharing, but what is its level of support and what's the purpose of the position? So cutting them, then what was its value? What is it? You know, you might be going without something. I mean, just as we talked about, staffing is not easy right now. The terminology used is a BT, for a beginning teacher. A beginning teacher needs more support normally than a veteran teacher. Do you have things in place that support people? That provide services? You know, principals are a lot younger than they used to be. Used to be you served 10, 15 years in the classroom, you served 7 or 8 as an AP, and you might serve 7 or 8 in the last third of your career as a principal. Now principals are being put into positions 7, 8 years into their career, period. They need support. They don't have the overall experiences. You're all seeking qualified candidates. It's a challenge. But again, all those pieces and parts doesn't automatically you size up a central office to say one number fits, because some central offices are doing a much better job providing services and support that ultimately help drive the district in some of its most crucial areas. And then again, unfortunately, it's the world we live in. But there is so much compliance and reporting that some of the people do nothing but submit reports that are required to be sent to someone else. You know, it's overwhelming. I mean, even in the finance arena alone, it's almost every month a survey sent out where the legislators want detail on this, want backup for that, want support for this. So you just have to remember, too, if you don't have those people, you don't want to go being non-compliant because you'd put some of your funding in jeopardy, so on and so forth. And then again, it's not right. You have expectations of what the people are doing. They have job descriptions. You know the superintendent's evaluating those, the hierarchy within the organization's evaluating the people that are under them. But again, there's expectation that those people are delivering. Fund balance, you're going to hear a lot about fund balance, or you have as a board member. Fund balance, and you know, you're always told, be careful what terminology you use to explain it, but it's really what money do you have left savings after you've taken away your revenue and expenses for a year, your assets minus your liabilities. Sometimes you commit fund balance for certain things that roll into the next year, but your unassigned fund balance really describes how much resources do you have for what it says. It's unassigned for some other purpose, and what is available to the district should an emergency come up, should you have a hurricane in this area, so on and so forth. You know, even from a facility standpoint, you know, you could have a boiler go down, you can have a chiller go down, you can have a major roof issue. You don't need your fund balance so low. You will hear this more times than not. You'll go to training across the state, and some of your experienced board members can speak to this. Everybody wants to know, well, what's the percentage we should keep in fund balance? Local Government Commission clearly defines it for county government. It's between 8 and 25%. They've got to retire debt, so there's a rationale that they maybe should have more money on the books for their fund balance because they're floating debt for a number of buildings across the county, so on and so forth. But it doesn't mean the school system should be at 0, 2%, or 3%. Most auditors will tell you somewhere between 8 and 10. You should have maybe 3 months' worth of revenue on hand. All those things, again, have to be evaluated as you look at your own financial position. Yes, sir.
Can you just restate who it is that's recommending the 8 to 25? Because we clearly have issues around our fund balance and having it, decrease so much over the last many years. And this is a conversation that has to come up with the county, to allow us to maintain a little bit of a fund balance. Who's recommending the 8 to 25%?
No, that's for county governments. A local government commission recommend, that's
Local
their
government
amount
commission.
that they require of county governments. And county governments have to go for what's called AAA rating in order to, it's basically taking out a mortgage for the county. And that's kind of what's built into their requirement structure. Because you don't have taxing authority, you can't really obtain debt on your own. It's not as clear as it is for the county, but that's a restriction of the local government commission for county governments. But again, and I'm seeing this, we're seeing it everywhere, county governments, and I don't know if they attended a workshop or what, but they're all pushing school systems to spend down their fund balance. That's not good fiscal management.
Thank you.
That's not proper. You need the ability to run your district. You are a huge organization and a huge part of New Hanover County that the amount you have, and you can go back and review your last year's audit, it's not significant for a district this size to be in that position. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to be here when we had a really healthy fund balance, and then COVID hit, and ours was brought down. And now how much did you say between, you say 3 and 8% is what we should have in our fund balance normally?
You should
for
have
healthy?
somewhere about 3 months' worth of operating revenue, but normally it equates to somewhere in the reference of about 8%.
Okay.
Is when you do the math compared to the numbers, it's usually in that realm. So.
Well, I remember when Florence hit, and we were probably one of the few school districts in the state that were able to handle it really effectively. It was wonderful, actually. And then COVID hit, and then our county commissioners, they're the ones, because of the COVID situation, that has forced our fund balance down. That could be what's going on across the state right now as a response to the federal money and then this change in the finances of the schools. That's just a supposition, but we had a really healthy one, and it was wonderful when we had one.
And this is some of the numbers I'm going to share with you a little bit later as well, but our 4-year average of what we have taken out of our fund balance and put into our operating budget is $6 million. So every year in the last 4, we took an average of $6 million out of our fund balance to balance our operating budget.
Good.
And what's the percentage of our operating, of our fund balance right now? It must be like 2%, 1%.
2.1. Oh, 2.1 million.
Yeah,
sorry.
not, yeah, right.
That's
Yeah, but it's pretty, it's well under 8%.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's closer
Well.
to 2 or 3%.
Out
Yep.
of 300 plus million.
Yeah.
But it was,
2 million doesn't go very far.
Right.
it wasn't like that up until about 4 years ago.
So Ashley,
Yeah.
what was the county commission, they passed the thing that said, a resolution or whatever, in the last maybe 4, 5, 6 months, that said, if you spend down your fund balance, they didn't promise, but they made some sort of promise that they would come to our aid quickly or whatever. Remember that?
We got into an agreement with them that they are going to pay for any damage due to weather or hurricanes or.
Right, we pay 500, I think it's 500,000, and then they'll pay,
Right. So we reached an agreement with them.
Yeah.
Because they wanted us to pay the fund balance. So, yeah, maybe there was a memo to all of the county commissioners somewhere that said, do this.
But if you hear nothing else, again, I try to make a point of the relevant information. The only entity within any organization that can approve the use of fund balance is the Board of Education. Superintendent can recommend it to you, but you have to approve the use of fund balance. So it may come to you in the form of the budget resolution. When he brings you his balanced superintendent's budget, he may say, we're using, the 6, 6, and 6 for the last 4 years. He might say, hey, I need 500,000, but again, you have to approve the use of fund balance because you're ultimately saying, hey, we're committing our savings to either something that's one-time or reoccurring expenses that we need to balance that year. But again, I try to keep things simple in my world and not try to, it's not rocket science. You can't spend more than you get, and at some point, it's going to run out in any of those equations. But you'll hear different terminology, committed, assigned. Something may not have been completed in one year and you're rolling it over to the next year. Ashley may have it on the audited books that says committed. You may have started a technology purchase. You may have done something. It may be committed. You may be taking care of facility needs that were because of a storm. You committed resources that you approved during the previous year that roll over in those form of fashion. But unassigned is where you have the balance. State, federal, well, federal has a couple places that have carryover, but state gets zeroed out. It's not the most productive spending in the world because that's where the majority of your funding comes from, but state allocations are basically spend it or lose it. There's one or two small pots, textbooks, technology, and some of your remediation money that carries over, but everything else, if you haven't maximized it, it goes away at June 30th. So again, just some challenges, some productivity within that process. Again, we've talked about this, and I'm not going to harp on it. Key benchmarks. What percentage of the budget, revenue and expense? You can't only think expense, you have to look at your revenues. You don't have a large number of additional revenues, but again, hopefully you're generating some of your EC dollars for Medicaid services. Hopefully you're billing appropriately for your ROTC, and none of them are significant, but you have to monitor all those other, you charge indirect cost on your federal programs. A lot of districts were able to grow their fund balance over the last 4 years because they were charging indirect cost on federal programs, thus having some more money to carry them through some lean years. You all were having to make major reductions and thus really not building that up to the level probably most districts were, just because again, different challenges, different places. And then again, 3 years with or without COVID is usually normal to see what those trends were. Go back 5, 8, 10 years, sometimes things change too much in that period. I always say a 3-year trend, and even looking forward, a 3-year trend. And that's something, again, Dr. Barnes and them do a phenomenal job from what we've seen, but you have to get your commissioners to understand there's some dollar amount that every year is a required amount just to maintain and keep the district moving at its current level. Without reductions, without whatever. If salaries are going up 3%, if retirement's going up 0.5%, if hospitalization's going up, utilities are going up, insurance is going up, you have to get them to understand that I'm just going to use a round figure, it may be a $3 million figure a year. You get anything more than $3 million, yes, you might be able to do something additional and new. You get less than $3 million, then you're continuing to try to right-size your district with less resources. And again, the state can give you allocations that all of a sudden they reduce, increase, whatever, but it's a lot of unknowns. But the trends will tell you a lot. But I just, and again, it's labor intensive, but it's not that hard to carry out a couple of those big ticket items to say, hey, what's our salary and benefit cost for the next 3 years if a 3% raise goes into place? If retirement goes up 0.5% each year, just so you have some idea, your utilities, you take those 5 or good 10 big buckets, project those out.
Just for a hand, we're projecting 2.6 million. Forecasted increases in benefits.
Is that district-wide 2.6 million increase?
2.6 covers like raises in benefits, our increase to our liability insurance, and an increase in our utilities.
How about health care? Is that a separate bucket?
That's tied into that, raises in benefits.
Again, I'm not going to harp, but just know as another thing as a board and the staff, again, it's their responsibility, but your ADM drives just about everything, your membership in your schools. You have to track it. They track it right down to the school level, to the grade level. That's how everything is generated. Formulas are at the state. When you got 18 kindergartners, you get a teacher. When you have 16 first graders, you get a teacher. Those things fluctuate, they change, but you can see based upon this chart, and it's a little bit old, but North Carolina ADM in total has been dropping. You would not think that these are the 5 districts that grew the most over the last 10 years, or these were the districts that declined the most over that time period. When you start putting a Durham, a Guilford, into the large, and again, this is number, this is not percentage of your district, so you can always make a number a lot of different ways as far as how, but But again, tracking those, and you're going to oftentimes hear, and I'm just going to preface this, everybody as they have declining ADM has to look at consolidation. But closing a school is nowhere near the savings for the cost of that school on an annual basis. It's somewhere between 15 and 20% of what you spend on a school is what you save. Because your kids are still being moved somewhere else. Your salary and benefits is the majority of that cost. So really all you save when you close, and I'm not saying you don't consider closing a school, but the majority of savings comes about from a little bit reduced transportation costs, some insurance reductions, saving utilities. You might be able to cut some clerical staff, custodial staff. But again, that's a small percentage that people want to say, oh, you're running X number of schools. And yes, you all have some small schools, but it doesn't mean if you're spending $4 million right now, you're going to save $4 million if you close it. Because you're still going to have to educate, whether it's 300 kids, 700, or 1,000. And again, people like myself and in operations, we're very number specific. It's changed. But there was a point in time that it said an elementary school wasn't self-sufficient unless it had over 800 kids. But again, in order to work within the state allotment process, in order to get the teacher, an assistant principal isn't allotted till you get 1,000 kids. So for every small school, you're usually investing more than what it really takes to run the school from a, not a weighted student formula process, but from a allotment that's very position-driven, dollar-driven, so on and so forth. So again, figures don't drive everything, but you have to look at things as you make considerations in budget. Pat, do you have a question?
Yeah, what was that percentage again, Aaron?
For what you save, usually it's between 10 and 20% of what you save in closing a school. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just trying to clarify your charge here. When you have it in parentheses, that's how much you've lost?
Yes.
Okay. And as far as the school allotment coming from the legislature, that's pretty, I guess you're not able to answer because maybe a lot of people don't. Where did they get their justification for having such out-of-sync allotments with reality?
Sorry, that's just such a good way to say it.
Yeah, really, it is. Where do they get their justification a year? I mean, maybe you're closer to the source of being able to understand why they come up with these very unpractical allotments.
They use their own trends, but no one can predict live birth rates. No one can predict the impact of homeschooling, of charter schools, of vouchers, but they look at historical trends, they try to analyze, but it's like you're saying, it's very numerically driven versus really something that's relevant to a lot of the individual school districts. You know, some parts of the county, I mean, again, there's 13 dying counties in North Carolina, which means there's more people dying than are moving into them. You all live in a community that has a lot of growth, but they can't say that all the people that are coming here, are they attending public schools? Are they making that choice just because of the growth? You know, I used to try to, it was the most important number I helped try to generate in the districts I worked in, and I worked in 2 of the 15 largest districts in North Carolina during my career. But again, live birth rates in a community, all those things drive at it that eventually you hope they're going to be kindergartners for your district. And, you know, we want to right-size schools, but people think that, well, if I had 600 kids in my school this year, then you should allot me 600. Well, you could have a big 5th grade class graduating and a small kindergarten class coming in, or vice versa. So they're juggling it, and again, I don't want to preface anything, but they do a phenomenal job tracking their positions to their schools, their funding source, and the numbers. So that's just a huge variable that even with all the uncertainty allows you the ability to know that you've got things covered in your budget.
Well, you answered the ADM question. I think your question was the allotment formula itself is wrong.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where we struggle because, and I can agree with you, I think a little bit, yes, the smaller the school, the greater amount of overhead. And you're starting to see that we're having to share. Like our smaller schools, where you're going to have to share art, you're going to have to share music, you're going to have to share a social worker because the formulas are wrong, not the ADM components are wrong. Now, do we have places we could maximize? Maybe, but that's not in and of itself the only problem either.
Good clarification, and I always take credit for someone clarifying what I said incorrectly, but no, it's, the size of the school, again, is because we're in an allotment process.
Right.
And districts are having to resize that a social worker, a counselor, a media person, the art, the music, you know, and it's hard. You try to have X number of grades, but they, you know, if you only got 2 classrooms per grade and they don't make that number, no one wants to hear the word combination class or those very challenging aspects, but those are the things that don't come in neat packages. But now, and again, Dr. Barnes knows this better than, K-3 class size was a great initiative, but it was not fully funded. So,
They do that a lot with a lot of things.
so that's all I remind you as you said, again, and I'm not going to bore you with numbers, but this is your ADM allotted history from the state from 1997, 98 to current. They changed the way they did this current year, and moving forward, you're now funded the next year's allocation based upon your second month ADM of your current year. So if all of a sudden you grow like crazy from your second month of this year to what you project for next year, you're fighting for those resources. They had to bring the General Assembly back into town for them to address growth money. And, you know, the charter schools were fighting for it and the public schools, but it almost didn't get approved and it wasn't proportionally funded to what numbers they had across the state. Right now, again, you're projected to go down a small amount. You all kind of hit a peak right before COVID. You've trended down the last 4 or 5 years during that time period. But again, these things drive every one of those position allocations that you get from the state. So I just put together one example, and again, you have staff that does this 1,000 times better than I do.
Aaron, before you go on, if you'll go back to that previous slide, because I just want to share with the board, because, you know, ADM changes every day, so depending on who's running the report and what we're talking about, you see different numbers, and I know it gets confusing. So, you know, this slide is showing how the state funded us, but in a slide that you'll see when Dr. Barnes and I do a presentation, I'm showing where our student ADM numbers were at the end of that fiscal year, and then I'm showing you for the next year what we're projecting the number will be. So that's why sometimes there's differences. And so like in 2022, there's a big difference. You know, it's showing here 26,000 students, but when I show you a chart later, I'm going to have 24,602. That's when the state held us harmless because everybody thought the kids were going to come back. So even though our kids were at 24,000, we were still getting money like we had 26,000. So I just wanted to clarify that because you'll see different numbers later. I didn't want that to be confusing.
This next slide, please don't, I know I shouldn't, once you put a number together, it's a number that someone's going to confirm, but this is just a brief example of what's now projected as your 25-26 enrollment versus your 24-25 enrollment and what it will do to just your teacher allocation.
This is ours.
Yeah, but don't hold me to this. This is just to give you an example of right now, if they hold you to your second month ADM, you drop a little bit, right off the top, you're cutting 13 teachers. So you have to right-size your district, and again, you have hundreds of thousands of teachers, but it's always a moving target, and again, I don't want to ever speak for Ashley, but every finance officer will tell you growth is easier to manage than decline. So just going up even a small amount each year, but when you're ticking down and you're trying to run the same number of schools, utility bills don't drop, insurances don't drop, you got the same number of custodial, it becomes harder, and you're going to hear protect the classroom, but you're going to lose funding that's directly associated to the classroom along with some other allocations as ADM is the driver of that factor.
And can you go back a slide, please? I'm sorry, thank you. When you look at all those grade levels, that loss of 13 teachers, kids don't come in buckets of the same number. So what happens is you could lose 2 or 3 in each grade level, you still have to have the same number of teachers because there are class size mandates. And so what happens is it doesn't always balance itself out that way. And so that's why sometimes you have to see some moving of a teachers around in the beginning of a school year. We try to get really close, but like Jen knows, we'll get to August and you've got 12 in your kindergarten classes and this school over here has 20. So how do we move and balance that is a real delicate sort of dance, really.
Because if you look down that column of the decrease, there's not a significant material number in any of that column, even though it adds up to a few. You got to divide that across all your classrooms at that grade level across the entire district. If one school was losing that 100 students, then yes, you can cut 5 teachers from that one school. But when it's 3, 4, 7, 6, as Dr. Barnes stated, and again, this all relates to the complexity issue. People think, oh, you just have teachers, the same number of school, you operate, you give, all of it's a changing, moving target, and it's driven off of membership and numbers. Again, how do you begin this? You all have already begun it. You're all in the throes of doing it. You started back in the fall, you presented some things right before the break, you've presented things after. I can tell you, you're on a good track for what you've already done to get yourself, but we've got to remember, it's basically coming up on mid-February. Superintendent's budget being presented to you by April, he's going over today, priorities. Things have to move very quickly in a very tight time frame, no matter how much you've spread this out. In other time frames, you all are doing a great job. As much collaboration as you can get, the better, the more people that have input, but it's hard. I mean, you can do surveys, but you can get 1,000 different opinions. You can get a lot of different information. Framing the process, explaining what you're trying to do, and again, keeping things at a summary high level helps. Determine your baseline for performance, and encourage engagement by all stakeholders. School principals need to be involved, but school principals, again, usually have arguments for their school, for their situation. Doesn't mean you don't involve them. I'm married to a principal, so I'm taking that, putting that in context there. So, but again, school principals argue as they should for their school, their needs, their desires. You have to look holistically at the whole district. What we're not going to go through today, but I just want to make you aware, and there's unbelievable information. Again, I'm the first to acknowledge it's labor intensive, it's a struggle. But you have to have some understanding in time, what are you doing to trade off different things? Because you're not always going to get new money. You're going to have tools in place for the superintendent to, and he does, to evaluate things, to bring to you things that not only are you adding, but you may be reducing for the budget. You're projecting more than 1 year. You have a roadmap that looks not only at expenses, but revenue. You know, and it's a hard slide to put before commissioners, but those same commissioners that may want to see your fund balance spent down, Dr. Barnes will do a great job showing them that it's going to cost almost $3 million a year and an increase moving forward to do nothing new. You know, so again, each thing is unique to a school system. It's called strategic abandonment, but you have to be smart about what you get rid of. Because oftentimes in government entities, 10% cut across the board. Well, sometimes you're losing some of the most productive things you're doing in the school system. You're not right-sizing it to what's making a difference, what's working, what's actually benefiting the district. It's really challenging to get into the detail to say that strategic abandonment has made people, and again, worked with a ton of central office people, some of the greatest people in the world, but their job is to defend what they do. So there's a lot of job justification to the programs, to the services, but when you're having to right size it and the number of cuts you all have made here the last couple of years, then all of a sudden you have to really say, when we get rid of this, what's the impact versus getting rid of that, or if we're doing this program, because you stick around education long enough, things come around about every 7-8 years, but it's really pretty much the same concept under a little different name and a little different technology. But education can't change but so much, and a lot of things have been tried, but most people weren't around 7 or 8 years ago to know that it's already been kind of worked through. So again, all I do is introduce to you today, there's great tools within these resources of creating some of those spreadsheets. They're a finance person's dream if that's all they've got to do, but your person has a lot to do in a department that's already doing a lot to get a lot of things out. But as you all move forward, are you tracking what's working successfully, all those things? Again, it's not rocket science. So each one of them has the tools, the description, some outlines of what they do, and they even provide you the resources. Again, just in conclusion, remember, your resources go to your schools. I believe this, and I really mean it. You all have a school-centered budget. You don't have a district-centered budget. You have a school-centered budget, which means you're putting the resources in the hands of the schools. It's allowing them to have the resources they need to be successful. again, you have staffing ratio allocations. Hopefully in time, the state's going to look at some sort of weighted student formula. There's been talk of that. There's been, some conversations around that. They came out with a chart about 3 years ago, and everybody went haywire because it took from the poor and gave to the rich in their chart. So that basically cut it off. But at the same time, somebody's going to have to be adjusted somewhere in that when you start. So, but there is conversation, and then always know the cost of your operations. Again, there's current steps. You all are in the throes of it, but just get quick wins. You have a great PR department. Budget isn't the most glorified thing in the world, but a lot of times the successes that go on financially need to be highlighted just like anything else so that the district has credibility around what you do, feels good about how you manage your resources, and it takes time. I mean, I always said, couldn't get to sleep most nights because there were so many things running through my mind of what was going on operationally, financially. You can spend your entire career working towards success, and it can be torn down basically overnight or in 1 year. So it doesn't take much to trend in the wrong direction when you're going in the right direction. And if you go through what you are, budget should align with a lot of your strategic things. It should be parallel. They shouldn't be running separate. You all have a number of those tools already in place that are working, I believe, successfully. So final recommendations around some things that you need is, it's probably as much of a catchphrase word as there is a transparent budget process. But transparent doesn't mean a 600-page budget book. It means relevant budget information that the person can interpret to what are the priorities of the district. I've seen a lot of districts put out 600-page budget books, and they take a lot of pride in those, but no lay person is pulling much information out of that. I'm not saying it needs to be 5 pages, but you have to be really putting transparent information out there. Again, you all know it, and it's in your current documents, and it's done as well as anywhere we've ever seen. You track your positions on an annual basis. If you had X number last year, how many do you have this year? How many did you have 3 years ago? That's in historical information. It's on your website. Again, that's the #1 driving factor at your budget. Again, review your contracts and vendors. You're going to hear people tell you to do zero-based budgeting. That may be something you can do if we ever get to weighted student funding, but even at that, there's certain things that you have to start with what's needs-based, what actually exists. You're not going to get rid of teachers, you're not going to get rid of bus drivers, you're not going to get rid of custodians, so you really can't say that you're starting at zero. I've fought that argument for years of how do you get there? Why don't you do zero-based budgeting? Because 90% of my resources, or 70% of them, come prescribed for something that's already outlined. You've done a great service to your community. You've started a budget advisory committee. You have a very strong budget calendar. And within the budget process, there's never enough time to deal with budget, but you have to work smarter, not harder. You really just have to work smarter in getting that information, going at it appropriately. So glad to answer any questions. I think you all have great things that you've got to look forward to, but you've got challenges. You just can't lose sight of it.
I was actually wondering, you shared in the beginning the roles of the board, the roles of the superintendent, and the roles of the CFO. Would that be possible for you to share that with us, like in email or some form? That'd be great. Thanks. Ms. Bradford?
Well, I was going to, could you repeat that? I'm sorry, for some reason I didn't hear what you asked. I'm sorry. Sorry.
You're fine. The roles of the board, the roles of the superintendent, and the roles of the CFO. That's what I'm asking for. Yep.
Heard that.
Ms. Bradford?
So where are you in your process with us and consulting with us? Are you done, almost done, and?
We're significantly close to finishing, and we're working with staff to bring about some of those final pictures, so I don't think it's too far off in having that report finished from our standpoint.
So could you or Ms. Sutton enlighten us where we stand in terms of the analysis of revenue and how we're doing? And was there any that you found for savings that we can hope for?
Every district has potential for saving, but I don't think till we kind of lay out the whole thing operationally, I don't think we want to really name figures at any point, and those figures still have some work to be done in order to realize them, but again, staff does a wonderful job, and some of those things we help look at, but again, I think when you see the final report, you'll feel very good that the thing you have to remember is so many districts are struggling across the state, and you may have been there at one point in time, but you have the structures in place for success.
Mr. Merrick?
So I appreciate the timeline. I think it's really important for us to kind of grab that and stay with it. And I know that we are to expect something from the superintendent by May 1st. Members would really like that to be January 1st, you know. But just kind of wondering if you have any sense about when we might get our first look at that budget.
I'm going to be able to share with you what I think our my superintendent budget priorities are today. And then, and then the rest of the operating budget, I have to spend this month working with departments, going over their specific needs and asks as well. So I'll be able to share with you up to this point all the work I've done with talking to our stakeholders and bringing you together what I feel like is a focused budget, school-focused budget, based on what the stakeholders have said they need. So you'll have that today.
As far as May 1st, think that it will come in under that?
We committed, I asked that we give our county commissioners our budget on April 15th. So that's the current date I'm shooting for.
We're on track.
But doesn't it go from you to us and
It
then
goes,
to the?
yes, you guys approve my budget recommendations, and then I carry it to the county commissioners saying, all of us together, this is where we are.
Thank you.
And we're going to talk a little more about that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, yeah.
Thank you.
That was interesting.
Dr. Barnes?
Do you guys need us?
Yeah, I'd like a break.
All right, we are really cramming on time, so just a couple of minutes and I'll bring you guys back.
And Madam Chair, I move that we extend time so we can have all the.
I have limited time today. I can't extend too much.
I will accelerate. This is my AP class, so we'll be good.
Next time that cola.
All right. Wait, yes, we're- Oh, crap. Okay, so. I can extend about 15, and that's about it.
Is this the last thing that we do?
This is your card.
Jen, would you grab the, some classified staff, meeting with directors, meeting with parents. I think there was several more. I met with the turnaround task force. So I met with just stakeholder groups throughout the district. Yeah. So what I'd like to do is walk you guys through the same exercise because I think it's important for you guys to experience sort of the challenges that our staff had as well. So to start off, what I did is each of you has a card and each of our cabinet members has a card. And if you guys can group together based on your like card, please.
Villagers are here.
So you may have to move your seat.
Werewolf.
Villagers, do you want us to come over there?
Come on over here. I have my own speaker
We'll go to the werewolf.
Oh, wait, everyone has villager?
There's two of us have villagers.
So,
Yeah, there should be one person that has the same card as you.
one.
No, Pete and I both have villager.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
I didn't shuffle.
I tried to. Board members, go sit with a cabinet member. I don't care which one it is.
I'm coming, Jen.
So I've lost I need somebody. Somebody, can you come?
Obviously, I outsmarted myself. So if one of you would go with Dawn, if one of you would go with Robin, and the other one go with Eddie.
We worked. I'm with Dawn.
And you can all try hard, but Mr. Wilburn and I are going to win.
I'm sorry, this is a game? Are you playing a game? Are you
Not really.
okay, good deal. And somebody can hold it
All right.
depending on the game.
I want to remind you, I called you the advanced class before we went on break. So let's bring it back.
All right, we got this.
All right.
All right, people.
Eddie. Mr. Merrick? Mr. Merrick?
Dr. Merrick,
Robin? Jen?
somebody, anybody?
All right.
We don't get over here.
Part of what I want to share with you is sort of the conversation that I want to have with our county commissioners. And part of this conversation is talking with our stakeholders about what I'm calling ROI, which is important for all of our stakeholders to feel that whatever we put into our budget this year over and above what we already have has to be based on what's a return on the investment for children. It was hard because I would look at a group of teachers in the face and say, I know you guys are exhausted. I need you to push through that to what do we want to focus on student outcomes? Because I think that's what's going to engage our community. It's what's going to engage our commissioners as well. For me, and I think I told you this yesterday, Mr. Merrick, Dr. Merrick, for me, the argument about who is supposed to supply the water when our house is on fire doesn't help me put out the fire. While I know that the county commissioner leans in a lot of ways, they also add SROs, they also help with nurses, they help with our pre-K program, but I have very limited ability to move the federal government or the state in funding. The only people I can look at in the face and say, I know you care about our kids, are the 5 county commissioners and the 7 of you. So I have to push where I feel like I can get movement. So some of our asks, I'm not really saying it should be some person's job or another person's job to fund it. What I'm bringing to you is what our kids need today to be successful. And interesting, you'll see that the ask we come to is almost exactly the amount of fund balance we are no longer using. Because I think that's a significant point as well. This is the first year in 5 years that we have not touched our fund balance, and it affected children. So to that start, this is an idea, an activity designed to help us focus our thinking on outcome measurements, not what we feel like we need, but what we can prove that we can move, right? So the first step is what I want you to do is think to yourself, what is the one thing that our kids don't have that they need? Or what is the biggest thing that's stopping us from moving forward? The one thing I'm going to ask you to do is don't put staffing as the problem. Now, staffing may be the solution to the problem, but I want us to focus on what is the problem of student learning. Because the solution may be we need a person to fix that problem, right? But what is the actual problem? Staff. Now, staff may be the vehicle by which we fix the problem, right? And generally will. What's the problem? And I'll give you some, and I know it's hard because you only have one index, you only have one post-it note. I will say that there are things that have come up. Some things that have been, I'll just give you a couple of like examples. Student behavior has been one.
Sir, stealing answers.
Chronic attendance and absenteeism has been one. Safety has been one. Graduation rate has been one. Those are just some ideas to spark your thinking. I tried really hard not to give those ideas out to the stakeholders, though, because I didn't want to skew the results. So when I just opened it wide open, what do you think is the biggest issue and problem facing us today? And to inform your thinking, I'll give you step 2 to inform your thinking. Your next step is to tell me what data point connects to it the closest. So make sure you pick a problem that you can then give me a data point that goes with it. Sir, no. Mr. Wilbur, I know you. You don't have any friends. The only one. Probably. Okay. As you guys are focusing, again, I'll give you a hint on step 2, which is what data point connects to it. What data point connects to that problem? Okay. For those of you that are ahead. Yes, I know. Sometimes teachers go close to certain students to help progress in the classroom. I mean, that's one of it's called proximity control. All right, now if you're ready, I want you to take your index card, please. Take your post-it note, please, and put it on a strategic goal that you think it connects closest to. Your data point, we're going to run it right now. That's what it is. All right. my group activities aren't always enjoyed by teacher. So I will tell you, yesterday, I taught all the fifth graders at Blair, all the boys how to tie a tie. This is going about as well. Yes. Okay. No, because I had to wear ties. Then I came, then I went to the county, then I went to the chamber thing. All right. Okay. Here's what you guys came up with. I see challenging student behaviors, and that's Julie's handwriting, because I recognize it. Student engagement, individual support and student achievement again, attendance, safety, student behavior, trauma and behavior and suspensions, and student-teacher ratio. Awesome. Because all of this is exactly what your principal said.
Oh, good.
Almost perfect. So here's the next step. These cards have been seen by hundreds of people. I'm going to give, okay, thousands of people. Not as many as the snow video, but you know. Can you pass one along? Okay, this is a way for me to help isolate your thinking a little bit. So, apparently you didn't give us sarcasm.
Oh, my goodness.
Look at your goal or objective. You put down the main problem. The main problem, I'm just going to pick one up here, challenging student behavior. Okay. Right, I know, right? Because that's what and it's so important that you said that, because I'm trying to find a way to dodge that, right? But that's really what it is. It's about funding, but I think funding, because my concern is if I go to the community and say, we have to work really hard, I don't know if that resonates as much as we want your child to be individually grown with a teacher who can help them at the level they're at. That says it differently, right? Or we want to address challenging student behavior so that there is less trauma and violence in our schools. That affects people differently than, boy, we need more help, right? Right. All right, so the goal problem, you need to turn your problem into a goal. Maybe you put the word reduce or increase or individualize, whatever you guys put as your goal up there. So your goal might be, yes. Work on trying to find a way to put that into a statement. Look at you. What'd you put? That's going to be a tough one to get a data point for.
No, we have ways.
Okay.
We have ways. We've thought through it.
When you look at step 2, go ahead, let me finish. No, you're fine. Finish what your thought is before I go on. Yeah, go ahead. I don't want to leave you guys behind again. Number 2 is sort of the simplest one for us to get. What are the barriers that are stopping it? I'm not worried about us coming with number 2. I've got those. But number 3 is where you put your data point. Okay? Number 3 is, how does this change kid? Because what I'm trying to do is build a snowball that by the time it gets to the county commissioners is so big that everybody knows about it. All of our talk now, all of my superintendent comments, all my visits are going to be focusing on these priorities. Because when the county commissioners do receive our budget, I want them to go, gee, I've heard about this 100 times already. We can't not focus on this. 3. Yeah, you jump. I've got 2, so you can skip 2. Okay. Sir, you guys can do one together. It's fine. You can use one for the two of you. You can have up to three clear data points.
Which number are we on?
Number 3, sir.
That was step 2.
Step 2 is to go to number 3.
Oh, no, not that, but the step 2 before was the sticky.
Okay. Why do you think that the data point is critical to have as a part of this process? Why do you think that the data point is critical to have as a part of the process?
It's got to be measurable.
Why is the measurement piece important?
So we can show that the money was spent well.
Yeah.
I'm thinking not about this budget cycle with our county commissioners. I'm thinking about next year. I'm thinking about next year when I go back to them and said, we asked you for this money, I'm here to report what that money did and how it resulted in student outcomes. Because that's going to be the vehicle, I hope, which manages an increase in further funding. That once we start building momentum, we can show that the money they're spending is worthwhile and how it's being spent. Does that make sense? Ma'am? Right, but these specific budget priorities are additions to our budget, not currently what we have now. Yeah, this is what I'm asking for guidance for, is the additional things we're going to ask. So the last thing I'm going to ask you guys to do, because we are short on time, is looking at step number 5. If you look at number 5 on your sheet, it asks what you're going to do. What steps would you take? What do you need to make that goal happen?
Well, the most obvious student test scores, because that's what everybody in your budget. Well, if you've got less, you've got original, because you get that. Safety is. You have very nice handwriting, by the way. Yeah. It's like some food. Not your food, that's 3. Yeah. Well, look for resources. We'll look for resources so we can. Right. Well, remember I brought you that way. Just looking for sources, finding something. So that we can include students that and you could also allocate that where needed. Because you might have situations where you don't need that high low ratio just because of the nature of the
Yeah, I'm just trying to send this email to everybody with the submission thing on it. Okay, if I can bring your attention back for a minute. This is when I say I'm not going to talk until everyone's quiet.
You can hear me? Clap on. Teaching tools. It's Quiet Coyote. Quiet Coyote.
Okay, Ashley's going to come and collect your cards a little bit so I can have them to review. Oh yeah, you can go back to your seats if you want.
Would you like the card you have?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Here, I'll pass this around. Just stick your cards back at them. Hey, Eddie, can you collect the cards on that side of the table? Oh, thanks, Jen. Here you go.
Do we have to separate you two? And go back to your seat.
Really, it's not any better over there either.
I know. Misbehaves wherever he goes.
Thanks.
And all of it through a bar.
I'm gonna get a t-shirt that says trouble, I'm weird.
We can pass those out.
All right, Dr. Barnes?
Oh, wait.
Thank you.
Those were mine.
Eddie moved my stuff. All right. Whose stuff is this? I already have it.
All right, people.
So I want to bring, at our next budget work session, since we did get short on time, I'm going to ask Ashley to give to you today what we use as a copy of our local allotment formulas and the state allotment formulas, so you can get a sense of the differences between the two. I will tell you that this is how we allot positions to schools. We do some revision on it as we go. One example is, several years ago, one of the funding changes that we made is turning the ISS position at middle schools from certified to classified. The high schools were already classified, so sometimes you'll see minor changes like that, and some are based on student need, not on number, namely social workers and things like that, EC students, that kind of thing. But we want to give you copies of those to take home with you, because that's going to be what we queue up first next time. Because as he said, 85% of our budget lives inside the allotments. I will give you just a brief example of that cost of addition increase that happens every year. This past year, I think we had 144 custodians. We had to cut 10 of them, and our bottom line cost was the same as the year before. The increase is 10 of those positions. And that's really what I'm trying to come at with you folks as a board, and then with the county commissioners next, is I've ordered all the pizza we can afford. And if we want to have everyone have more pizza, we either have to get more pizza or less people eat it, because we can't afford more. And I think the question is, we are at a subsistence level. We are at our basic level of services now. And that's my concern, is I can't find anywhere else to cut. Now, a couple of things I want to just put in your head, and I want you just to write down a couple of numbers so that you can lay awake at night as much as I do.
And I do.
Go for it.
Thanks for that.
You're welcome. Over the last 4 years, our average draw out of our fund balance has been $6 million, 5.9, which means even in our height of ESSER funding, we were still taking $6 million in. And I think there were some people that would say, even then, we weren't serving our schools enough with the needs that they have. We have now lost not only the ESSER funding, but with the budgeting that Ashley has done and our work with HR is created a year where we haven't touched our fund balance. But it puts us in this subsistence level, that this is as low as we can possibly go. So there are a couple of other numbers I need you guys to be thinking about as we go forward. One is that we'll see a reduction in our what's called Safe Light revenue. Safe Light is a City of Wilmington program where if you ran a red light, you got a ticket. Apparently, you can now just run them whenever because they're stopping that. That was $1.4 million based on the last average of the last 3 years. Yes, ma'am.
You just said, this proposal, are you meaning what we've been doing in 24, 25, that's subsistence, or 25, 26 is going to be subsistence?
Right now, we're at this is our subsistence
sit?
level, right?
So 24, 25?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you tell us things that we have less than even last year.
Yes, and things we're going to have less next year.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to make this sound any worse than it already is, but it seems to me that we are subsistence at this point. When we have crowded classrooms, trailers, on and on and on, how can we actually even say that we're at kind of baseline? It seems to me that we're a little underwater already.
I agree with that.
I don't want to minimize the work to adapt that our principals and teachers and staff members in schools have done, though. We are serving children. We are serving children to the extent that we are. My concern is that this is I can't go lower than I am now. And we can argue about whether or not now is too low or not. I'll be all behind that too statement. But I think my concern is that I have people coming in every day and getting the job done. Whether or not they're all doing jobs that they shouldn't have done before, some of that is, I think, a misnomer. I will tell you that part of the reason that Ashton and I have worked so hard to build this committee, to build a transparent process, is because next year we know that we have the potential to ask for a bond. And that bond is part of we can't fix some of the problems we have, even if the county commissioners open their doors completely to some of the major problems that we are experiencing, stuff like New Hanover High School, stuff like the overcrowding at Laney. Those things are bond issues. What I want to sort of do now is rebuild consumer confidence in the work that we do as a board, the work you do with the superintendent, because it's our platform for next year going with a bond. Does that make sense? Yeah. So a couple other things. Sorry, I don't want to get lost. So that Safe Light revenue, even at the subsistence level we're at now, we're going to be $1.4 million less next year based on the elimination of that program. We also have to forecast, and I know this is something that we talked about briefly before, the forecasted cost increases, which you're going to see in things like utilities, liability insurance, and benefits and raises. Just that number alone is $2.7 million. And that is just to keep us at our subsistence level that we're at now. Okay. So yeah, 4.1. Here's what I'm trying to tee up as a superintendent budget priority, and they're not there yet, but here's sort of the areas that we're circling around. We sort of have had two, and interestingly enough, you guys landed on the same two that our principals did, that our staff did. One is a question of safety. So there are safety, and the principals, are interestingly enough, have been talking about intrinsic and extrinsic safety, meaning sometimes violence happens at a school where a kid is making a choice to be violent. Sometimes violence happens at a school where a kid is either run out of or never learned effective coping mechanisms to deal with stress. How do we fix both problems at the same time? One is, do we look at fully funding this safe and civil schools process to help regulate our kids better when they're younger so they never have these issues when they're older? And how do we ensure that parents send their kids to a safe school? So that one of our goals is going to focus around that. Sort of like a two-pronged attack on that. The other thing we're talking about asking for is, quite frankly, every school, every department, everybody has faced a cut. There's not a school that hasn't lost people. And when I talk to principals, the thing they're missing the most is the ability to be agile and move intentionally with a small group of high-profile needs, right? So what I'm talking about is high schools lost their graduation coach. Elementary schools lost their NHCS coach. Everybody lost their instructional coaches. And so what I want to ask for is the ability for every school to have, basically, I'm trying to build the budget so that every school maintains what they have right now. Every school maintains where we don't go any further underwater, okay, than we are right now. And then ask for an addition of one position per school. And that position, the role and responsibility of that position is generated by the school improvement plan and by the school improvement team at each individual school. Because it's hard to say you need this at your school, but you need this at your school. And so build it in a way that it's a part of their school improvement plan and they attach goals and responsibilities to it so that I can monitor whether that position is doing what it's supposed to do. And we've sort of come up with sort of zones for that position because you can't just say, do whatever you want with it. There has to be bumpers up, right? So we're thinking of things like, is it academic remediation? Is it academic extension? Is it behavior controls? Is it graduation rate? There's going to be 4 or 5 specialities that we're going to ask them to focus it in on. And maybe they can do 1 or 2, depending on the group. But what the schools need and what the principals need is a little bit of agility. Because when a child, and we'll just use behavior, when we have to empty out a classroom because a child is run out of their effective coping mechanisms, we don't just hurt the learning of that child. We are hurting the learning of all the kids in that room. If there was one person in a building who could be designed to help with that, what would it look like if J.C. Rowe or Lake Forest had one position that transitioned with that kid back to their regular school to ease them back into their environment successfully? What if we had one person at Hogger whose only goal it was to get kids across the graduation line? We've cut to the place where we don't have that. My goal, and I know it seems a little fuzzy, but we used to use $6 million of our fund balance. I'm asking to keep my budget requests under that number. But these are things that we had before. We had 80% of our schools meet and exceed growth. And then we cut resources and supports for those schools. I've got to find a way to lean them back in, but also keep hold of some sense of accountability, because I do think the county commissioners deserve to know, and you guys deserve to know, whether those positions are working or not. So that's sort of what it looks like. I don't have exact numbers yet, and I want to, but I want to make sure that I'm giving you guys at least a theory of where we're going, at least where my budget priorities are going to come to you at. What questions or thoughts kind of revolve around that?
I'd like to start out with, what if the principal said something like, I need a person that can be multitask, like an assistant principal, that would be able to jump in when a child is having a meltdown, but also help in another area on top of that.
I want to be careful that position doesn't add into the administration. I think it's going to be a certified position, so it would be like a teacher or a teacher-ish. But I'm going to ask schools to focus on one or two goals, because if you sort of spread that out too thin, if you spread them out too thin, it's hard to measure whether it worked or not. Does that make sense? And I really want to make sure it doesn't feel like we're just adding to the top.
Dr. Merrick?
Well, as somebody that has watched, it's very...
Dr. Merrick? Did you have something you wanted to say?
That's okay.
I'm
I'm hoping we all have a chance to ask a few questions. I know we're running late. I know that the schools are really big on data. Thank you. I'm not really very good at keeping track of that kind of stuff. But what I really want to know is that we are able to show that those positions are effective. And I know that it's not going to be seen right away. And so I'm just saying, whatever ask we have, there's got to be, right? There's got to be some flexibility that says you have to give us a couple of years to prove this.
That makes sense.
I'm hugging you from over here. My ask is going to be a 2-year ask, because it will take time to show. And I'm not asking for this 2 years because I think the county commissioners should be necessarily the ones who should be giving to it. I'm asking for the 2 years so I can continue to lobby at the state level for these unfunded mandates that are put into our school to be addressed. I'm hoping that within 2 years, the state will be picking up the responsibility for this position. But so I'm asking for a little bit of running room, if that makes sense.
Ms. Justice?
Well, we are a very wealthy county, and honestly, we should stop being afraid of asking for what we need or our kids are going to suffer. We've got to acknowledge that, seriously, the amount of effort that goes into funding our schools is something like 70th out of the 115 districts. It's statistically been proven. So we've got to be brave with the county commissioners, because it's in their best interest and all of our best interest to have our kids educated properly. Otherwise, we're going to keep spending money on things like law enforcement, housing, food programs, because people can't do it on their own because they're not getting proper education. So we really need to start taking that tack instead of being afraid of if you want to say, increasing taxes or asking for bonds. I'm so glad we're finally doing that. But I mean, as a board...
The board has to do that.
That's why, as a board,
Yeah.
This is something that we need to be discussing. We should be discussing it in public, too, because that's part of our responsibility. But we need to fight for our kids, and we've got the resources in this county to do it. And our county commissioners were elected, and they're good people. I know some of them. So we'll be able to do, we should be able to do this all together.
Yep. And that's where I think bringing you guys a budget, you guys will have to approve it. I need to make sure that I bring you something that I can, one, manage effectively, and that speaks with the voices of the staff and the students and the principals. And so luckily, I think we'll be able to have done that.
I'll make a motion that we...
I have one more thing for you guys.
One more thing.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, that ends our formal meeting of the budget. I wanted to just preview for you guys one thing real quick that I just emailed you, if you want to open up your email.
Everybody's...
Sorry. You can see it on here. It's easy. It just got sent to you.
Yeah.
Anita, did I send it to you as well? I did, or did I not?
You did.
Look at me.
Beautiful.
I quite frankly get sometimes hundreds of emails a day, and I'm sometimes having track keeping up with board agenda request items. So what I've done is send you a link that disappeared.
It's gone.
It was great while it lasted.
It's still there, it's just.
I got it.
Okay.
There we go. You got it.
I'm not singing.
All right. The sentence that starts the board chair and superintendent, apparently I never finished. I will finish that. But if you go if you go down there, see as it's signed in, it says, "Hi, Anita Baggy," so it knows who it is. All you do is click on the drop-down menu for board member name. You put your name in.
Everyone again.
You weren't David Perry, as far as I can tell, and it knew
All
that.
right.
That's why it stopped.
How about this? You guys look at the email.
Okay.
It's fairly simple, but I'm losing track of making sure I catch all them all. So what I will do is when the date closes, I'm not trusting it. When the date closes to have submitted requests, I can get a printout from this form. We can decide which is agenda review, which is agenda, and then I will send that to all 7 of you, so you'll know everything that's going to be on the upcoming agenda a week ahead of time. And that way, I don't have to worry that I've missed something. Okay? Yes, sir.
I'm still confused about whether we send policy changes to the agenda review, or if we send them to policy committee, or both.
Policy,
Actually, policy,
oh, here he goes.
2410 outlines the whole thing.
Yes, I
I'm
asked you the
piloting
same
this. If
question
this-
last night.
If this works well, I'll do one for policy as well. Okay. Look at that.
Perfect.
Guys, I will tell you that we've sat through budget processes before. I've never felt as good as I do right now about the relationship between the board, the cabinet, the superintendent, and the budget process. I feel like we're all working together, going the same direction, so thank you.
I agree. This is a whole lot different than last year. We were so stressed out, and it just kept getting worse.
Well, maybe I'll relax once I've done it 11 times, but for now, I want us to be building on what we're doing next year. I want us to be building on the year after that, because I want to see a new Hanover High School redone. I want to see a new Trask so that Laney is less crowded. I want those things for this district. But if we don't restore confidence in the community in our budget process, we're not going to get it. So, okay, that was all I had.
Dr. Madden?
I'm done.
I'm so sorry, one more thing. We heard from the consultant, I'm sorry, I don't know his name, that... Okay, Boulier. And of course, I know that it's the board's responsibility to bring the bond, but I think that the board will do well to have cabinet and superintendent input. We need your direction, your boots on the ground a lot more than we are. We may or may not agree, but we need your input.
And we have our sort of our top 10 list already, and already priced out for you guys.
Appreciate it.
All right, there was a motion to adjourn a little bit ago, and Ms. Bradford is seconding it. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. I didn't hit it that.